Rodriguez Ortiz was a remarkable woman. An immigrant from Mexico with little formal education, a non-English speaker whose large family of 8 children achieved the American dream. Pimmy's family settled in Cotulla, Texas when she was 12, and it was there that she later met and married Lorenzo Ortiz Jr. And I might add, Lorenzo was the first Mexican-American to ever graduate from Cotulla High School. When Lorenzo obtained employment with Kelly Air Force Base in 1952, they moved their family to San Antonio in search of a better life for themselves and their children. Pimmy always described herself as an ama de casa, a homemaker, but that does not do justice to the role she played in the Ortiz family. Because Lorenzo worked long hours, often late into the evening, she assumed primary responsibility for rearing 8 children. But she did also her part to help Lorenzo make ends meet. She ran a small grocery store out of her home in Cotulla. She took in washing and ironing. She sold Mexican ceramics and clothing in the front yard, and she held garage sales. She was an expert seamstress, sewing clothing for others on an antique Singer pedal sewing machine. Doing math in her head, she told customers exactly how much material would be needed for a dress or for alterations. She was legendary in her ability to stretch a dollar. Any leftover material from sewing jobs was made into clothing for the children or scraps for quilts. Some of us may have slept under some of those quilts. Every summer she took the boys to harvest crops in Illinois and Wisconsin, leaving the day after school ended and returning the day before school began. Pimmy made the girls stay home to, quote, take care of their dad. Silly girls, they cried as they watched the old black truck pull away from the driveway, thinking that the boys had all the fun going out on a family vacation, which is how Pimmy described this migrant work. If Pimmy were here today to talk to us, she would brag about her family and her children. So let me do a little bit of talking for her because their achievements are a huge part of her legacy. Her mathematic and linguistic skills were remarkable for a woman with little formal education. She always read the newspaper. All of her children recall that she had them reading in Spanish and knowing their multiplication tables as they entered school. She insisted on a commitment to education and this proved to be a production of remarkable achievement and degrees awarded to her children. There are 2 PhD degrees, 4 master's degrees, 6 bachelor's degrees, a business college degree, and all 8 had post-secondary education. The eldest son, Angel, earned a bookkeeping degree at Durham College, and he and Archie were skilled machinists. Angel retired after a lengthy career with Twin Discs Manufacturing of Racine, Wisconsin. Now her 3 daughters chose careers in education. All 3 worked for South San Independent School District at some point in their careers. Amparo, a graduate of Texas Women's University and a former Peace Corps volunteer, was the first Mexican-American high school teacher and coach at South San. Alma and Alma both have doctorate degrees in education from the University of Texas at Austin. Alma served as a special education teacher and diagnostician for South San and retired as juvenile education program director with the Bexar County Probation Department. Alma retired as a University of Texas at Austin full professor with national recognition as an expert on the education of bilingual children with disabilities. Albert and Amadeo told Pimmy they didn't need college degrees. They were joining the police force. But the promotions came to a halt when college degrees became necessary for high-level police appointments, giving Pimmy a chance to say, I told you so. Both earned multiple graduate degrees, with Albert becoming chief of police for the city of San Antonio, and Amadeo was elected as the sheriff of Bexar County. I have to tell you that Archie enrolled in college, but quickly discovered that higher education was not for him. He got up one morning for a semester pretending he was going to class. Pimmy discovered he wasn't doing that when the recruiter knocked on the door to pick him up because he had enlisted in the Army without telling her. Now, Ampie and Alva's memory of the boys going into the service was of a military officer arriving early in the morning on the porch of 802 King Avenue and asking for a specific brother. Fear of Pimmy meant that the son had not told his mother that he had enlisted. Pimmy, always crying, would demand the son kneel before her on the porch in order to receive her blessing prior to leaving for the military. And apparently this scene was repeated numerous times for numerous brothers. Pimmy could have predicted that college was not in the cards for Archie. She walked him to elementary school every day, dragging him by the arm, with a belt draped over her shoulder. Now, Ampie and Amador report that they were instructed to keep Archie at school, or the belt was for them too. Now, Pimmy always insisted that she never used corporal punishment with her children. There does seem to be a difference of memory by our children on this point. For example, to create some extra room, the boys were sent to live in the little house in back. Pimmy looked through the window and saw the boys in the room smoking. Their memory and her memory about corporal punishment part at this point in the story. Now, Pimmy had a lifetime commitment to South San community and was actively involved in many neighborhood associations and causes. Long before she herself could vote, she worked political campaigns, posted signs in her yard for her favorite candidates, and drove registered voters to the polls, using that time to convince them of who it was they needed to vote for. Well, perhaps one of Pimmy's proudest moments, though, is when she, more than 50 years ago, became a citizen, passing the citizenship exam to be a U.S. citizen. In fact, she called me up and her perfect Spanish told me that since she was now a citizen, I should only speak to her in English as she was just like the rest of us gringos. I do recall asking her if the citizenship exam was difficult. She said no. She only missed one question. Pero, ¿qué es Mondavi? At that time, Walter Mondale was Vice President of the United States. I recall how proud U.S. Congressman Ruben Hinojosa was to see all 5 Ortiz sons, Angel, Amador, Arsenio, Amadeo, and Albert, in their military uniforms and individual pictures on Pimmy's dining room wall. Congressman Hinojosa was at 802 King Avenue on Pimmy's 101st birthday and presented her with a flag that had flown over the United States Capitol. To this day, Pimmy likes to have drawn many people's attention to that flag that sits on top of her. Thank you. China cabinet. That's where it is. If you want to see it, it's right there. Many of the photos in the slideshow that some got to see revolve around Pimmy's birthdays. When asked how we could celebrate her 95th birthday, Pimmy called upon her famous love of casinos and asked to go gambling. For those of us that have never gone gambling with Pimmy, one must be prepared to gamble 24 hours a day, non-stop, as Pimmy does not go to bed. A large number of the Ortiz clan took Pimmy to Lake Tahoe. Upon arrival, Albert and I were helping Pimmy and her suitcase up 3 flights of stairs to her condo. At 9,000 feet altitude, oxygen was hard to come by, and Albert suggested to Pimmy that she could pause on the stair landing to catch her breath. She told us, "Tu es loco, me muero de frío, I'll freeze to death." As she continued up the stairs with her boundless energy and strength, Albert and I sat down. All the kids would agree that Pimmy was a strict disciplinarian, and they all knew they would be in serious trouble if they disobeyed her orders, and they admit they were a little, more than a little, afraid of her. When Lorenzo died, Pemmy insisted that his 5 sons serve as pallbearers, even after they begged her to let grandsons serve that role. After a long discussion themselves, and with the courage of maybe more than a few beers in the carport, they decided to put their foot down and to tell Pemmy that they were not going to be pallbearers. They selected Angel and Albert to deliver the message to Pemmy. They invited her to join them around the kitchen table where all important decisions were made. Angel took one look at Pemmy, stood up and said, "Mom, Albert has something to tell you," and walked out of the room. Albert, whom we all know to be direct, no-nonsense kind of guy, looked at her and said, "Mom, we just want you to know how honored we are to serve as pallbearers." And that's the way it was. Well, Albert sums it up this way. People look at my mom and see this frail, gentle, kind little woman. We look at her and see an 800-pound gorilla. Pemmy owned a ranchito in Lytle where she raised cows. Pemmy loved the ranchito, and there are many memories and stories of days and evenings at the ranch. On one occasion, Pemmy instructed Amadeo and Albert to retrieve a toro that had escaped to the vecino's pasture. El Toro was perfectly happy where he was in the neighbor's pasture, and Albert and Amadeo were having no luck moving this giant bull. Pemmy instructed me to open the gate as she explained, "Problema es el toro no se mi hijos." At which point she steps through the gate, makes a unique sound, and El Toro immediately takes off toward her and follows her through the gate. That bull knew not to mess with Pemmy or Now, every day she made that 50-mile drive from San Antonio to Lytle in her gold Cadillac to check on her livestock. And in her early 90s, the kids became increasingly concerned about her driving. Now, her collision with the train may have contributed to that concern. But they did not like her being at the ranch by herself, knowing she could easily be trampled when she stood in the middle of 20 cows or so coming when she called them. So they designed an elaborate scheme, unknown to Pemmy, but to get a family friend to tag along with Pemmy to the ranch. Now, as they were traveling down I-35 in that gold Cadillac with Pemmy's head barely visible above the headrest, the friend said, don't you think you're driving too fast?" Pemmy said, "I don't know. With my eyesight, I can't see the numbers on the speedometer." Now, when she got home, Amadeo asked her how the day had gone. She said, "I don't want that old woman to come with me anymore. I spent all day taking care of her and didn't get any work done at the ranch." Now, of course, that old woman was younger than Pemmy. There are a number of stories about Pemmy's driving, like the time on one of her trips to the ranchito down in Lytle where there was a serious accident on I-35 and DPS closed the southbound lanes. DPS was directing traffic onto the access road after driving over the grassy divider. When the DPS officer arrived at Pemmy, he instructed her to put her car in reverse, back up a bit, and drive over the grass to access the road. Pemmy instructed the officer that she does not do reverse. The DPS officer said, "Move over and I'll do reverse for you." That officer then wished her well on the rest of her trip, and obviously this was a good decision by DPS. Now, if you were to ask Albert, Amadeo, what they would do if they had to arrest their mom, they would without hesitation say, "Call for backup." You may recall that in 2002, a burglar broke into Pemmy's home and threatened to kill her if she didn't give him money. That incident demonstrates two things. Pemmy wouldn't give the devil her well-earned money, and she was a skilled negotiator. She convinced the young man that all would be lost over a few coins in a purse, and that's all that she had. And that he wouldn't want to spend the rest of his life in jail for killing an old woman for some loose change. With a cuchillo, he roughed her up a little, but with the knife, he decided, when she didn't relent, that he would just push her in a bedroom closet, pull a bookcase over the door, which he did. She said, I was like a cockroach on my back, kicking my legs in the air for hours until she finally kicked that door open. At that time, Albert was the police chief, and the media naturally was focusing upon a robbery and assault of the mother of the police chief of San Antonio. Now, media asked Albert why he didn't move his mother from such a dangerous neighborhood. Albert told them to go visit his mother and tell her to move, as he's tried many times. Now, Pemmy was never one to retire from visiting with the media and was asked why she didn't move. Her reply was clear: "Es mi casa." The young man was quickly arrested, and Pemmy joked later about putting a sign in her front yard that said, "Only a fool would break into the home of the mother of the police chief of San Antonio." One smart, tough, resourceful, articulate woman, not to be messed with. Pemmy lived a long and a healthy life. She delighted in telling people that her doctor complained that if all of his patients were as healthy as she was, he would starve to death. She also constantly complained that her kids were spending her money taking her to the doctor because the doctor never found anything wrong, never prescribed medication. However, if you asked her if she would take medicine if the doctor prescribed any, her immediate answer was, "Por supuesto que no." Of course not. When it became clear that Pemmy needed help at home, the kids hired caretakers to live with her. She fired 5 of them in the first 2 weeks. She'd try to scare them away by saying things like, "Do you like rats? This house is infested with rats." When the kids tried to convince her how wonderful the caretakers were, she would say, "Well, if they're so great, why don't you take them home to live with you?" Thankfully, in the last few years, she accepted the help and finally quit locking them out of the house when they went out to check the mail. Pemmy was an extraordinary woman. The photos in the slide show her testament to how much she loved her children, her grandchildren, her great-grandchildren, her great-great-grandchildren, and the huge network of other relatives and friends. The stories are many, but to make a long story short, God did not shortchange the time he gave Pemmy. Estamos muy tristes hoy, pero the life of Pemmy has been remarkable for more than 104 years. We're all better people for having had her in our lives. There is a beam of light coming from heaven, entering this room today, taking Pemmy to her cathedral in heaven.